Hello, I'm the Grub Street Lodger, and you find me with my typical January cold in schlubby mode, talking about January's books, of which there are quite a few, and they were very good. So let's get started. I started with a reread of Laurence Sterne's Sentimental Journey. It is his other book, other than Tristram Shandy, and he died before he finished it. So it's 2 volumes of what was supposed to be a 4-volume work. It's actually a reread for me. I first read it when I was in my real first flush of 18th century novel love in about 2010, 9, something like that. So yeah, my first real rush of it, and it was rather a lesser one of the books I read that year because I read Tristram Shandy, I read Biography of Johnson, I read Vicar of Wakefield, I read Art of Ingeniously Tormented, I read all sorts, and it was a bit of a lesser one. So I thought I'd revisit it and see what I thought of it now. And I still think it's a lesser book than Tristram Shandy. It's just not as inventive. The characters aren't as strong. There's no Uncle Toby. There's no Walter Shandy. There's no Trim. All these sorts of people. There is Parson Yorick, who, on a whim, decides to go to France. And in fact, Britain's at war with France at the time. He doesn't consider it, and then he has to rush about trying to get a passport. And he is, as he says, a sentimental traveller. So he's not going for the landscapes. He's not going for the history. He's going for people and to find out about people and find out about himself. A lot of this seems to be sexual, even though he's a vicar. The version I had here, which had illustrations by Martin Rao, always depicts Tristram with an angel and a demon on his shoulder. And there is quite a lot of whether he's going to give in to his good self or his base self. So it starts off, he gets there and he has a bottle of wine, and the bottle of wine makes him feel very generous, and he's like, I'll give money to anybody. I'm the most generous man alive right now. I love the world. I'm at peace. And then a monk comes and asks for money, and he's like, I'm not going to give money to a monk to fund his monkish lifestyle. I'm a Church of England vicar. I don't agree with these Catholics. And so he doesn't give money to the monk, and he actually has a go at the monk. And then the monk goes off and talks to a beautiful woman, and he thinks, oh dear, that monk's going to make me look bad in front of this beautiful woman. So then he goes and he's very generous with the monk to try and impress the woman, and they swap snuff boxes. His is a beautiful tortoiseshell snuff box, and the monk's is a cheap one made out of a horn. And it turns out actually the woman's not that impressed anyway, but hey. But from then on, whenever he gets the horn snuff box out, he's going to do something generous because it reminds him to. And it's the pacing in it's weird because the first 30 pages is an hour in France, and then it will skip a few days or it'll skip a few months, and then it will just deal very in depth with a few hours or a day, and then it will whoosh past a few more months. And he gets into little scrapes and adventures, and a lot of them are of a sort of amorous in nature. There's a lot of entendre. The book ends with classic in and in nighttime shenanery, and he reaches out to grab the light to turn to light the lamp and light the candle, but instead it says, I reached out and grabbed the fille de chambre, and then it stops and it says end of volume 2. And so you could read it as grabbed the fille de chambre. It could be arm, could be leg, could be anything. But if you read it in context with that last bit, is that I grabbed the fille de chambre's end of volume 2. So yeah, that sort of summarised it. So yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. It was it's a fun book, but it does sort of pale, I think, in comparison to Tristram Shandy, though other people think it's better. It's certainly tighter, but just less gloriously silly, to be honest. The next book I read is called Beware of the Cat by William Baldwin, and it's not often, but it is sometimes argued as the first English novel. It was written during the reign of King Edward VII, but not published until the reign of Queen Elizabeth, because it was finished then, and then Mary came to the throne, and there's quite a lot of anti-Catholic stuff in it. And there was a poem put to the front when it was published in Elizabeth's reign, where it implies the title should be Beware of the Catholic. But actually, cats aren't Catholic analogues in this. So it starts off with a bunch of people having a sleepover, a bunch of men having a sleepover, and some of these are real people who existed, like the Master of the Revels, and some of these are fictional people, like the narrator. And they're talking about cats and stories about cats talking and cats eating people and cats having an extraordinary intelligence. And one of them says, "Oh, I can prove they do. I'll tell you this." So he says, "I was staying at a bookseller's which was near Aldgate, where bits of torsos of people were hung up, and I saw cats and they looked like they were having a parliament. So I thought I'll look in a book and devise a potion that will let me hear what the cats are saying." And it's this long bit of how he makes the potion, and it is disgusting. All these different animals that he gathers, and pulps and fries and mushes, and does all sorts of things with the turnings of the heaven and magic words and all this shit. And then he hears, and there's this beautiful rhyming description of all these different things he's hearing. It goes on for about 2 pages, and then he manages to focus on the cats, and he hears what the cats are talking about. And this is why you should beware cats, because cats, they see our private lives. They're there to our intimate actions and thoughts, and they talk about it. And then the bits that the cats were talking about were sort of almost jokey, almost sort of Canterbury Tales like stories of deception and sexual shenanigans. And there's one bit where Cat exposes a lover when he hides behind a curtain, and the cat bites his balls, and he comes out screaming, and he's trying to strangle the cat, and it talks about him being bare-assed with a cat clamped to his balls. So that gives you a good idea of the tone of the piece. I don't know if it's a novel, but it's weird and silly, a very direct and very fresh feeling. I mean, the one I read even had all the old spellings and that, and it still felt fresh and daft, and I very much enjoyed it. So that was probably the first top book of the year. Sentimental Journey was great, but that was top book. Next thing I read was My Name Lon You Like Me. It says here a true story by Derek Sharman, but reading it, I think it's by this woman really called Areerut Sudha. And the reason I got this was because this is about the sexual tourism in Thailand, and the books at the back and the other books by this publisher seem to use it for comedic or thriller possibilities. Well, this is a very plain account from her. That obviously she's just saying and the guy's writing down, because the language in it is not. It doesn't read like someone with English as a first language. And essentially she runs off from her village, where, especially for women, there's just no options. And she goes off and she becomes a prostitute in Bangkok and other places. Sorry, cold. And I mean, she actually gets raped at 13, and then she becomes like a go-go dancer and stuff, all before she's 16. And it's very disturbing. But what's more disturbing than the sexual stuff is the financial stuff. She's sending home money to her family, and her family love this money. Her mum's buying TVs and things, and becoming an important person in her community because of the money coming in. And she's sending money, for example, for her brother to buy a motorbike, and then the brother crashes the motorbike within a week, and she's got to send money, do extra sex to send money for his medical bills. And he just loafs off her, and mum just loafs off her, and neither of them would agree with what she's doing, but they'll just take the money. And so everything becomes about money. She sees that the people, she's her boyfriends, some of them, as cash point machines, and her family see her as a cash point machine. There's no real escape from it. She even goes to Europe a few times, but the people there just want to use her for money. So she comes back and she's like, I have no other skills. And the thing that she prides herself on is that she tried to put her 2 sisters through school so they'd have a better opportunity. One of them sort of went with it and got the grades, and the other one sort of flunked out. But it's a very grim world of yes, sexual exploitation, which is horrible, and it really impacts her, gives her some terrible PTSD and stuff, but also just this restricted, tight money and possessions, and that's it. It's horrid. So next thing I read, very different, Invisible Planets. So this is 13 sci-fi stories from China, translated by Ken Liu, and he sort of mentions in the preface, don't use this as a way of understanding China, because sci-fi is always trying to be, humanistic, pan-humanistic. But here are some sci-fi stories from China, and they might be a bit different. And I really liked. I enjoyed the whole book, but there were some particular ones I liked. There was one called Tong Tong Summer, which was all about this sort of robotic avatar that carers could use to look after old people. And then the old people get hold of them, and they realise that they can carry on their lives through these robotic avatars. So they might be too weak to go and do stuff, but they're strong enough to control the robot, and so the robot goes off and does stuff for them. And it centres the people at the centre, aside from the technology, which I really liked. And also, it was a positive view. There was a lot of negative views of the future. There was one that was basically 1984, but basically the government forces everyone to live life online and then clamps down on online freedoms. That's kind of how that one works. There was a very elegiac one called not that one. 100 Ghost Parade Tonight was okay. What was Night of the Dragon Horse, Night Journey of the Dragon Horse, which is all of humanity is dead, but the slightly sentient AI things that they've created live on and have their own lives, which is kind of cool. So I enjoyed that one. Invisible Planets was all just ideas for different planets. It reminded me of Naomi Mitchison's Journey of a Space Woman, just sort of interesting what-ifs about different planets. I didn't understand some of them. There was one called Cool Girl where she summons dogs. I didn't understand that one at all. And there was one called Taking Care of God, where this whole group of the god civilization come to Earth, and basically they created Earth as a place to spend their retirement. And it worked for a while, and then it doesn't work, and they go away. But as they go away, they said, actually, you were the best lot. We had 4 planets we created for this, and the first 3 just declared war on us. So you're the nicest ones, and because you're the nicest ones, beware, because those 3 planets know you exist, and they might be coming after you. I don't read a lot of sci-fi, and I really enjoyed it because of the strange ideas. I would have liked a bit more characters. There were some characters, but I'd liked a bit more. So I'm going to read some more sci-fi and see what happens as time goes on. Next book, Everyone's a Winner. The story of a punk band called London by Jan van der Kiste, who was in a later version of London at some points. So this is a band called London. They were a 77 punk band. The reason I'm interested, apart from the fact I like punk, is that the lead singer was the guy who trained me to do open top tour guiding on the big bus company. And he was a really interesting guy. He had a really interesting life. He was very nice. And about the time I was with him was when the band were reforming. Pardon me. So we went to I think it was their comeback gig. It was definitely one of their early gigs in Denmark Street. And it was really good, and I got their albums, and I've been following them, and it was interesting to hear their story, because they're a band who came out and they never quite clicked with the public. I think because they're in the punk genre, but they weren't really punk. They were freedom. There wasn't a lot of smash it up, oiky laryness about them. It was just, hey, we got the freedom to play and have fun. The book's called Everyone's a Winner because that's one of their songs, one of my favourites actually. And I don't think that jibed with the attitudes and the sort of nihilism of the time. But they've come back and they seem to actually be enjoying themselves a lot more now, and they've released more albums now than when they're actually in their the punk days. The last thing they did was a sort of a concept album thing. It was like a story with a lot of mod influences. It's really good. It's called The Hell for Leather Mob. Anyway, so they were really good. Then I shifted. I went with Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, and this was the Geoffrey Brock translation, which when I had a little Google, seemed to be the general best English translation, people were saying. And Pinocchio's weird, isn't it? It's strange. He starts off as this log, almost like a Doctor Who villain, like a talking log. And then he's tortuously carved into the figure of Pinocchio. And then Pinocchio's a right brat and kicks and runs away. And he's always getting in trouble and crying, oh, I wish I'd done better. But he never seems to learn. Originally, apparently, the books ended with him being hanged, but then he carried it on. And as well as the things we know, like the turning into the donkeys and the bit with the it's not a whale, it's a dogfish in this, and as well as those bits, there's a town called Chumnus, which was so poor and deprived that even the butterflies had sold their wing for gin and stuff, their wings for gin. And he gets hanged, and then there's no the blue fairy like in the Disney one. It's the woman with the blue hair who starts off as sort of this creepy little girl ghost who's in a house saying she's dead, and then she comes back as this strict mother. And there's lots of sort of Mary parallels and Joseph parallels and Christ parallels. It's all very odd and spiky, and that's what makes it good, because it's not just a smooth moralistic tale. It's got real jags in it. The introduction said to understand Italy is to understand Pinocchio, and I don't think I understand Italy completely then, because I didn't fully get on board with it, but it was odd and interesting, and it will linger. And I was saying last year a lot of the books didn't linger. Well, I already know a bunch of these ones will, so I feel I'm on a roll. The next was The Swallowed Man by Edward Carey. He is an illustrator as well. He illustrates his book. He's also does sculptures, because the character in this does sculptures. Where's the really freaky one? There's some really freaky sculptures. And it's the story of Geppetto. So I got this, and then there was like, I should probably read Pinocchio first. So that's why I ended up reading Pinocchio. So it's the story of Geppetto. And it reveals how little time he and Pinocchio spend together, and he's narrating it from inside the fish, and he's going mad, and he's sort of counting his life by the amount of candles left, so in this story, the town is from, their big industry was plates, and his family were the owners of the plates, and they always had the same picture, but he could never do the picture because he never mastered that. The whole company went under, and so did the town. And he went off, and he talks about all these loves of his lives, all these tragic figures. The last one being a mirage caused by an ill-fitted gas installation that leads him to have hallucinations. So then he creates Pinocchio, and Pinocchio is this terrifying thing. He runs away, but he realizes that's his boy and he loves it, and it's his creation, so he goes after it. And when he's in the boat, he's always obsessively drawing Pinocchio and making sculptures of Pinocchio out of mushed up hardtack, his food. So he's prepared to sacrifice food to make art, but also carvings, so bits of the boat. And I think this is what the book's about. It's about creativity being both the thing that keeps him going, but also he is destroying himself to create, not just his mental self, but the physical surroundings he's in. It's very, it's this sort of grip of madness as he must create, but his creations destabilize the ship he's living in the boat, in the fish. He also, in a drunken state, creates a dark Pinocchio, and that haunts him and follows him about. It's a very gripping book. It's very peculiar and strange, and the artwork in it is very odd and disturbing, and this whole notion of he's consuming himself to keep himself going is very interesting. So I went for another Italian children's book, The Bear's Famous Invasion of Sicily by Dino Buzzati, the translation by Francis Lobb, who actually, this is a little letter from Buzzati to Lobb saying, "Thank you very much. That's a great translation." And there's a little bit at the end by Lemony Snicket, because I first heard of this book because Lemony Snicket says it's the best book they know. And there's a sort of reader's guide at the end. So it's about a bunch of bears who come down because they need food, but also because the king bear knows that his son has been captured by humans. So they'll search for the king bear whilst they search for food, and ends up taking over a town and then becoming civilized and degenerate, and it has a tragic ending. And in the end, all the bears go back to the hills to live their natural life again. And it's written in this combination of prose and really bad doggerel. So at one point, Ramparts is... I can't remember what Ramparts is rhymed with now. There's tons of really bad doggerel. And then these beautifully peculiar illustrations with these little stick bears that have a lot of personality for little stick bears. And when they're fighting and stuff, only the bears have blood, and the bears are cutting each other off on stretchers and things. And it all comes together to create this almost chronicle-like approach. Sort of a tongue-in-cheek chronicle and morality tale. But the tongue is so firmly in the cheek, you don't take it fully as a morality tale. There's a lot of humour in it as well. The beginning starts with meeting the cast of characters, and one of them is a werewolf, and it says, might not appear in this book, but if they do, we don't want to be surprised by them. I don't know if the werewolf is hidden in any of the pictures, but they're not in the text. And then the little bit afterwards by Lemony Snicket is really fun as well. Lemony Snicket, at Lemony Snicket's best, asking questions, and some of them being quite pointed questions, like in this illustration, why is it the bears are all one side and the people on the other? You know, was there a sort of apartheid thing going on in this town? And then one of the bad characters has his head chopped off, and it says, now normally you put them to trial and then fairly execute them, but this was just straight away. Which do you prefer? Things like that. So yeah, it's a really good book. Another sticky book. It's going to stick with me. After that, I read, not represented by here because I read it on Kindle, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I so enjoyed my Mugby Junction and my Pickwick Papers that I thought, you know what, let's have another one. So I had Great Expectations, and it starts so good, doesn't it, with the marshes and the convict, and then him going to Miss Havisham and how weird it is there, and you know, all the rot and the ruin and the strangeness of Estella. And then he gets his Great Expectations, goes to London. It starts to dip a bit, but then it comes back up when he finds out, you know, where his expectations come from. And it's a very tragic book because these two figures are both bent on a kind of revenge on, it turns out, one person. And being bent on revenge, they twist and ruin and manipulate the lives of others. And it takes the book for those others to find themselves and find their real footing. I mean, Dickens is so gripping and strange and good at describing all these weird things. I get very jealous. Get very jealous. I wish I had some of what he had, but there you go. The next thing I read wasn't that, it was this. Beryl Bainbridge, According to Queeney. Now this is not just a reread, but a reread. It's oddly played quite a part in my life. It was one of the first things that got me into Samuel Johnson, and then it was the first book of the Samuel Johnson book group. And then when I conceived of the novel I'm writing now, which is all about Nathaniel and Samuel, Johnson's two brothers, I've called it According to Natty, and I thought it's sort of a companion piece to this. So I thought, well, I'm in the weeds of that a bit, so let's read this and see if there's anything I can get out of it. So it's quite a critical read, really. I mean, I've never loved the book, even though it's been important to me. I've never loved it, and what I sort of concluded was the confidence to carry on in my own style, in my own way with the book, not to try and ape hers or get too much off her, because they're different stories and we're different writers and things. But it's a difficult book because the point of view is so mushy. It's a third person limited, but it shifts between people a lot. So each chapter has a sort of nominal point of view character, but then it rolls a lot between different people, and it makes it hard to get hold of and hard to get hold of any of the characters, which is part of the point, because it's all about how you can't really ever know anyone. So people think they know Samuel Johnson, but he'll have been seen from 1,000 different perspectives from 1,000 different people, or even 1,000 different perspectives from like 4 different people. And so it plays with that a lot. There's a lot of misunderstandings and things like that. It's not as funny as I remember it being. It's quite depressing. Queeney, there's a really weird bit where she goes to a church and this person with some sort of mental health thing snatches her necklace, and then she steals a necklace that looks like it from someone's house, and there's this whole thing about this buttons with dogs on it, and a story of a man who drowned himself, and there's all these odd bits going on. I can see why. I looked at the public reviews on the Goodreads and stuff. I can see why people were going, oh, it was just too many names, didn't understand who everyone was. Now, I did understand who everyone was because I'm deeply engrossed in the era and the people. But even then, you never quite get a firm footing. My piece is much more about 4 people, and then there are others, but there are 4 to anchor it on. And then the last thing I read was The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. Great concept, great story. It really does a good job with the concept. Like, the Prince and the Pauper swap clothes, and then stupidly the prince goes out in the rags to tell off a soldier and gets kicked out. That's a bit silly. But then from there, the pauper having to adjust to a royal life, hating it, begin to like it, begin to adjust to it, and then the prince steadfastly refusing to accept for anyone, to call him a pauper, and getting into worse and worse scrapes, and then swap back and stuff. What let this book down, though, was the style, because Mark Twain decided to write it in a sort of ye oldie style, especially the conversations, especially the royal conversations, and it just drowns the book in sludge. And I read this month a book written in the reign of Edward VII, and that was, yes, old-fashioned, but direct and hard-hitting and interesting and silly and funny. His cod Tudor style is what ruins it. It's not that it's a Tudor style, it's a fake Tudor style. But it's a book that's very good, but then just coated in tar. So there you go. This month I've started reading about the bookseller Edmund Cole. It's going to be a slower go because it's quite a dense book. It's good, but it's just dense, and then I don't quite know where I'm going next after that. But I think I'm doing a lot of sort of Grub Street and Pope and things like that, but I'm not sure. Anyway, that was January. Pretty good month in all. Good month for reading. We'll see how February goes. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.